Today, here we are to have a conversation with Ewa Majewska, feminist philosopher and activist living in Warsaw. We are going to have a conversation on her recently published book in Turkish, which is Feminist Antifaşizm. And the rest of us here we are all translators and editors who share from our hearts the desire and the responsibility that the book inspires to build our feminist struggles against fascism. Therefore, we are so honored and excited to welcome Ewa here today. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for taking all the efforts to translate the book, to have it published. It's really great pleasure and a big honor to have this publication done, really.
Okay. We can go on with our questions then.
Okay. The first question is coming from me and it's long, so sorry for that, but I try to explain my question. So the first question is about the relation between fascism and feminism, the antagonistic relationship with fascism and feminism. You say that in this book argues not only for embracing feminism, which is already a given in progressive political theory and struggles, but it also offers to see feminism as a central political force resisting fascism as well as one shaping the alternatives to the existing society. That means to take feminism as the core of anti-fascist struggle or the struggle to build anti-fascist forms of life. And actually, this is a positively provocative claim for the struggles and social movements, and also this brings to mind especially two questions. Firstly, anti-fascism can be considered a natural given in a feminist struggle. It may seem there is not so much to think further about the anti-fascist character of feminism. However, the title of your book, Feminist Antifaşizm, suggests that there is a lot to think about it. What the difference does it make to start thinking from a feminist antifascism rather than antifascist feminism? And also, the other question is related about that previous questions. The issues of sexuality, sex, and care. In other words, we can say reproduction and labor, maybe. Lay at the heart of the feminist struggle and debates, so on. In fact, it's life itself, which is constantly produced in so-called realm of production.
It is, absolutely.
Not in the end, because I have to warn you. Sinem, please turn off your microphone.
Okay.
Please. And I'm continue my questions. So, in fact, it's life itself, which is constantly produced in so-called realm of reproduction for the feminist counter-publics. Therefore, imagining and building alternative forms of reproductions are crucial. However, we also know bitterly that fascism is also an affective practice. It's related to reproduction and labor and effective realms, and also fascism is also an effective practice. It targets the life, it targets every cell of the life. Fascism is possible only with affective investments, like heroism, for example. You can handle it with other ways, but also fascism is also producing affects and emotions and so on. So feminism and fascism penetrating and they are penetrating and expands the cell of life. So my questions, I have to summarize it. Having read your works, I now wonder whether it is also this effective dimension of fascism that renders it antagonist with feminism. They are confronting each other on the same affective terrain. Isn't it for this reason that a feminist struggle against fascism must reclaim and liberate all areas of life, organize all areas of life in radically different way? So can we think of their antagonistic relationship in this way, the affective realm of life? I think just in the end
I'm gonna maybe start from the second question.
Okay.
With my answer to the second question, as it sounds very philosophically loaded and very interesting as a introduction, perhaps of a reference to two at least or three authors that are important for me. I think I mentioned them in the book, but I don't write much about them. So there is this whole theory of fascism as desiring practice and desiring production that goes back to Wilhelm Reich, and then is followed by Klaus Teweleit on one hand with this amazing book on the male fantasies, and then and maybe I'll say one thing about the book of Teweleit. This book is amazing, and it shows us a plethora of fascist fantasies about women and femininity. However, it sort of pacifies the object of those fantasies. So somehow it seems like as if women and femininity were a sort of passive resource over which the fascist imagination plays around. So while I believe that Teweleit's intention was incredibly feminist in unveiling the cruelty, the atrocity of fascist imagination, it sort of pacified women and femininity, and also non-masculine persons of whatever kind, because they write also about homosexuality, about non-normative genders, etc. So there is this problem of pacifying the non-masculine, let's say, in Teweleit's book, I think. And then there is also the amazing book of actually two books by Félix Guattari and Gilles Deleuze. Both of them are called Capitalism and Schizophrenia, and then the first tome is Anti-Oedipus. And in the beginning of that book, Deleuze and Guattari make a very solid claim about how fascism is not a choice, and how basically politics is not made by choosing, so by rational decision detached from any context and any affect, but it is precisely a desiring practice. So how much, so in Wilhelm Reich's formulation, masses don't choose fascism, but they desire fascism. That's a very different perspective, and I absolutely agree with the points that that you just made, Autonom, that precisely that's the one of the reasons, maybe the main reasons. I never thought about it much. So your question made me, I'm trying to talk and think at the same time. It can be very chaotic, but I'm really trying to do that. So somehow this affective rather than rational connection between fascism and feminism make this antagonism so evident, so strong, and so drastic at times, because this is precisely where two very different desires sort of meet. On one hand, the claim of women femininity, of what was classified culturally as feminine, because I'm not essentialist. I make very clear point in my book about not speaking of the category, not using the category of women in essentialist sense, so also not excluding. So I try to work against the exclusion of trans and non-binary and intersexual persons. So, but femininity as a reservoir of characteristics that have been so often and for so many centuries discriminated against, abused, but also extracted and exploited. So feminism as a movement to take back all this exploited potential, be it persons, bodies, relations, also kinds of relations, of course, is maybe the wildest possible opposition to fascism as a political current and as a version of desire in which, first of all, there is a fetishism of cleanness, clarity, and a very hard, very cruel regime of truth understood as obedience. And then in feminism, we have, I think, a very interesting effort to build a practice of truth, of life, as generosity, as production, as appreciation. So this is so if we put together fascism and feminism, or together maybe it is not possible, but one next to another, we see that there is very little amount of things in this universe that oppose each other so much as these two. So I really like the emphasis on this opposition and on this antagonism, actually, because it's not passive opposition. It's like when there is a feminist, fascists wake up. It's this kind of opposition. So it's a lively, it's an antagonism because there's immediate reaction. So a fascist somehow cannot stay calm if a feminist person, but also a feminist behavior is appearing. It's a very lively interaction. So I not only I imagine it like that, but also my life experience is like that. So it's very interesting how on this level, the theoretical practice and life practice sort of intersect, because it's very often that I appear in a room full of people, and then suddenly like the most fascist tendencies just, pop up as like trying to oppose the sense of the form of building politics as precisely as life making and life strengthening, as a version of abundance rather than restrictions, as a version of solidarity rather than putting into orders or putting into order, etc., etc. So this whole sex care reproduction context, feminism wants to make it possible and I think respect its diversity, while fascism has one vision of how it all should be organized. So this is, I think, the main controversy. It's that within fascist thinking and within fascist practice, there is the best way of doing it. While for feminists, it is kind of open, and we still debate, as we don't have one feminism, but we have a plethora of feminist positions. We also have very different visions of how things are. And then I go to the first part of your question, which is that what could be, I mean, I took some notes from what you were saying, and the most striking, the most interesting part of this question for me was this opposition of why doing rather feminist anti-fascism than anti-fascist feminism. So for me, I never met feminists who wanted to be fascist, at least not explicitly. So I met two kinds of feminists who actually were fascist de facto from my perspective, but they would never accept this definition. One of them is nationalists, or this kind of, so we have, maybe now it's not very present in Europe at least, but in the beginnings of 20th century, we had figures such as Mary Ricardson-Slasher, the woman who cut the painting of Velázquez, the Venus of Rockabye, in solidarity with Emmeline Pankhurst, right? So this woman was a feminist, was a suffragist, actually, she depicted herself like this, and then she ended up as a nationalist. So she was trying to promote women's rights and nationalism at the same time. But this is rare. This is a very rare combination. And the second version of feminist fascism is, of course, several versions of TERFism or TERF position. They can be incredibly hateful towards the trans person, and therefore, while demanding the elimination of TERF of trans persons, they make a very similar claim to what fascists claimed about Jewish people, about Roma people, about lesbian, gay, and other non-heterosexual persons, etc. So but this is history, hopefully, very soon. So feminist anti-fascism is less evident than anti-fascist feminism, while most feminism, I would say 99% of feminism, is anti-fascism. Therefore, there is no need, from my perspective, of writing a book, Anti-Fascist Feminism. There is a big need for writing a book called Feminist Antifascism, because I think many anti-fascisms, many anti-fascist theorists, many historians of fascism also, were thinking in terms of, I would say, exteriorizing feminism very far from the core of political discourse, and then locating in the core of political discourses only the classical political positions such as liberalism, conservatism, socialism, etc., etc. So feminism would be something very, very far on another galaxy, I would even say. Okay, so this project of feminist anti-fascism, my effort is to emphasize that every anti-fascism has to have this feminist core, because otherwise it does not address fascist political position. So we cannot conveniently externalize feminism and just build our anti-fascist argumentation based on non-feminist arguments, classical ones, in which fascism is only described by its racism, by its desire for order, by its state of exception. Because even if we take the concept of state of exception, very central for fascism, from Carl Schmitt, and later from how Giorgio Agamben is sort of reworking it to tell us about refugees, about contemporary modern societies, etc. If we take this notion, we can see that it's very different how, depending on gender, depending on race, but also depending on gender, the individuals and the whole groups are being treated within the state of exception, within this condition of exceptionality. So gender marks some sort of distinction, and it's not only about women; it's about the whole society, because everybody has a version of gender. Maybe people are not binary or something, but still gender is a category that describes them in this way or another, right? So somehow the issues of gender cannot be conveniently pushed away from the center of anti-fascist thinking. So this is why the title of the book became, in the end, because we had several versions, but in the end it became Feminist Antifaşizm, because I really wanted to put the two, feminism and anti-fascism, very close together, and later to make this argument that there is no way of being anti-fascist without taking seriously the feminist claim to the gender equality, to intersectionality, and to, let's say, an affirmation of what has been excluded as weak, as non-heroic, as material, as affective, etc., etc. So all these excluded qualities are, I think, reclaimed by any solid feminism, and therefore should become part of anti-fascism. Because if we have these references, I think our anti-fascist theory is much better and our practice can be more effective. So I hope I understood the questions, and I hope also I answered at least partially. We could talk about it forever because it's an incredibly vast topic, but I tried to maybe make a basic answer to your question.
Just thank you for your answer. I warn you, your image sometimes is frozen. Your internet connection is not stable now. You can change it a little bit, Ewa.
Sorry.
We can solve this now. Maybe. Yeah, it's working.
Now you can see me?
It's better now. Yeah. Okay.
I'm so sorry, because I see perfect image of all of us all the time.
No. Then okay, we can solve this like that. Okay, continue. So thank you for your answer, and we can continue the other questions. And maybe we can.
Yes, maybe we can move from the title of the book to the context in which it is written, which was where we also found it or discovered it, let's say. It's for sure that the massiveness and the radicalism that the global feminist movements have been displaying since 2016 is very impressive and fascinating. And it is from within this context of resistance and struggle that your book is written. And this is also how we discovered it, of course. What is so exciting about this movement is that they are really, there's something that they have shown us, that all the problems that we define as, or are defined as women's problem, is in fact a social reproduction problem that requires the transformation of the very foundations of society. The way these massive and radical movements confront this problem, as you say, forces us to reshape our image of politics or theory and practice of political agency. And this is another connection between feminism and anti-fascism, I think. And this is not surprising that you are discussing these protests in Poland and in other parts of the world, of course, as examples of feminist counter-publics. The book is taking its cues from the innovativeness, let's say, of the feminist global movements, but the book is in itself an innovation in terms of its toolbox of concepts, which is one of them is feminist counter-publics of the common, as you say. This is a beautifully put expression, let's say. And these counter-publics, as you say, are effectively challenging or assumptions about who can do politics and how. Therefore, firstly, I'd like to ask, what is it that makes these counter-publics specifically feminists? And secondly, but perhaps this may amount to the same thing, how does the notion of counter-publics expand or transform our understanding of feminist struggles?
Thank you very much for this question, and I'm really happy to hear the very affirmative and very positive response to my concept, which somehow it's always a little bit risky when we put together notions coming from very different backgrounds. So counterpublics coming from the critical German theory, or from Kant, Hegel, and Marx, and then the Adorno-Horkheimer sort of dialectics of enlightenment. So this is where certain parts, very important parts of the notion of counterpublic come from. Then we have Kluge and Knecht, and this idea that the public sphere actually does not necessarily happen in the bourgeois society or among the middle classes or higher classes, but that actually politics and public sphere and public debate also takes place in those sites of production, so factories, but also households, why not, and other places where reproductive labor is prominent. So somehow this idea of counterpublics, and then of taking this notion of counterpublics and bringing it together with the notion of common, is an incredibly risky practice, because on the other hand, the notion of the common in the contemporary debates, philosophical debates, it is at the core of a very different tradition, of a tradition that actually opposes very openly the Kantian, Hegelian, Marxist German philosophy context, which is the post-Spinozan Marxism of Toni Negri, of Michael Hart, of Bernard Bifo. I think he tries also to put those two together, but technically he also comes from that school, and other thinkers from Italian operational tradition. So we have two positions that criticize each other and have criticized each other throughout history in many ways and on many levels. And then suddenly, so I try to put feminism at the core of anti-fascism, and then also to combine those two very different traditions. So as you see, it was a lot of work and a lot of contradictions, let's say, which I tried not to cancel but to sublate. I tried to really be synthetic rather than eliminating. So this is an effort that I'm not sure if I succeed, but if there are some people who want to discuss the book, it maybe means that at least partially I managed to sort of rather sublate than to be more synthetic than erasing and part of the tradition. And interestingly, with Toni Negri, we had very interesting discussions about precisely the notion of common and how the common could be a part of public sphere, how a common maybe could construct counterpublics. So when he was in Poland on my invitation in 2015, we had several discussions concerning how the common functions, so whether the common can produce a claim. Because if the common is a multitude organized politically, a desiring collectivity, let's say, or assemblage of individuals and groups, then the question coming from Gayatri Spivak and the critical tradition as well is very simple: can the multitude speak, right? So while the multitude, we don't know actually, I'm not sure if I know the answer to that, but the common can speak definitely. I mean, at least Toni Negri said that it could. Now I can share this important information with more people. So, and for Toni Negri, it was evident that the common can speak, but for me it was not, because the amount of criticism that the rationalistic tradition of European culture and European German philosophy specifically has obtained from within the works of Negri and Hart is tremendous. So it's very difficult to imagine how, on the level of the common, how we can imagine not only speaking, because speaking, okay, we can imagine, but producing a claim, so speaking in a sense of creating an epistemological and ontological difference. This is the speech that we want to do, the speech from Spivak, the speech that makes the subaltern actually appear in its or their autonomy, which is, according to Spivak, very, very problematic given the domination of European subjects. So I was very happy to hear from Toni Negri that the common can speak. That was nice. That established a solid ground of trust in my thinking. But then I was, and my question, whether the common can speak and whether the multitude first can speak, was inspired by Paul Preciado and the questions that Paul Preciado asks to the multitude from the position of sexual difference. So the questions from Paul Preciado in Testo Junkie, very important philosophical book, interestingly, not just a story of testosterone taking, but actually a story of subjectivity in the making within European philosophy context. So the questions that appear in that book are also about can the multitude desire, what kind of desires it has. Does it have a gender or genders of whatever kind? These are also they are connected, because the gender positions and gender production, of course, require a discourse, and within a discourse we can speak of claiming, I think, and of claims. This is, I'm already forcing the French tradition to bend a little bit, but yeah. So the notion of feminist counterpublics of the common tries to reconcile the debates that we have seen on one hand between the critical tradition and the post-Spinozian Marxist tradition, but on the other hand, we can reference also another important person for creating the notion of feminist counterpublics, Nancy Fraser. So first thing to remember about Nancy Fraser is her text from 1992, I think, about the feminist counterpublics and subaltern counterpublics for that matter, but also her debate a bit later on, her discussion with Axel Honneth about redistribution and recognition, and how they try to, on one hand, give priority to recognition or redistribution, but also how they both claim to try to have a balanced proportion of the two, and how only, this is how I understand both of their positions actually, how only emphasizing redistribution or only emphasizing recognition leads nowhere, basically. It violates one of the main contradictions of modern philosophy and modern time, and modern culture and modern economy. So somehow for me it is important. So this is where I oppose a little bit certain part of Marxist theorizing, and I believe I never had a proper discussion with social reproduction theory representatives, but I believe this discussion would be interesting, is to what extent this social reproduction theory somehow marginalizes the issue of recognition, so the issue also of producing political claims, because as I understand the reproductive theory context, social reproduction theory context, the accentuation is put on recognizing the kind of labor. But my question is, okay, we recognize this kind of labor, fine, I'm all in. But then from the position of this labor, there has to be a claim produced. Otherwise, we're going to enforce a claim on that group or on those who participate in reproductive labor, right? So somehow what I'm missing in social reproduction theory is precisely this position of building claims. And this is also, so my theory is not against social reproduction theory. It's more a sort of, I wouldn't say gift because it would sound pretentious, but a sort of offering of like, okay, maybe this part is also important. So maybe after we recognize reproductive labor and after we emphasize the role of care, of affect, of desire, of production, etc., there has to still be a possibility for the subjects, for the multitudes, for the common, if we want, for the counterpublics to speak. So I prefer to speak about counterpublics. We could think of a notion of counterpublics of reproductive labor, perhaps, or but somehow I think that this recognition should also contain the structures, the theoretical structures for producing claims, and this is why the notion of counterpublics, because otherwise I would drop it and I would be all for feminist antifaşizm understood as, let's say, more recognition for reproductive labor. But I want this reproductive labor and the human and non-human subjects who contribute to it to be capable of building claims, and also to criticize and contradict and oppose verbally, but also politically in all kinds of ways, the existing status quo or the dangers of fascism if they arise. So this is where it goes. And then we learn, of course, from the social movements. So here also the legacy of Tony Negri is very, I think, very present in this strategy from me to learn from the actual social movement that happens right next to me. Actually, I participated in it. So it was in Polish academia, it caused one of the biggest scandals we had in the last decades. Because I was accused while submitting a habilitation application for not doing science as I participated in the movement I studied, and also as this movement was still developing. It was, I quote now one of my reviewers, it was still in statu nascendi. So this became a controversy, and there was a big question and a big debate for going on for 3 years about whether we can produce cultural studies and sociology and other sciences from an engaged position, so from the inside of the studied social movement, and without knowing yet where the social movement will end up and what it's going to become. So in the still process. So my arguments were that of course we can make this kind of science, and of course we have to use the methodology of Donna Haraway to give one example of situated knowledges. So we need to understand how limited, or what are the limits of our analysis. But we can still do the analysis, no? So my analysis in 2016 and later was of the strategy of the feminist movement in Poland and later in other countries as well, to choose the strategies that are ordinary as opposed to heroic or exceptional. So this was the first interesting characteristic. It was that they chose, instead of only asking those people who already were activists and who had very clear political vision and perhaps also certain predispositions to join political movements, so as opposed to that, some members of the political left and of the feminist movements decided to launch a sort of campaign of collecting the selfie portraits, self-portraits. So they started somehow with selfie feminism, as it was called, with this whole culture of Instagram and revisiting so basically something that many Marxist feminists were criticizing a lot. But if we take only this strategy of taking a selfie and putting all these selfies together, so if we take only this as a strategy, I think that's not a bad one. I think Marxism is not against that, or this is not against Marxism. So if we don't fetishize the activity of using the social media as such, but if we take them as an element of a much larger political struggle, I think then we can basically, I mean, my claim is that the Black protest, so this moment of using the selfie in Poland, was a moment when the feminist movement sort of appropriated social media for 1 or 2 days. Later, the social media were appropriating us and our time and our lives, of course, as usually. But for this 24 hours or a bit more, it was actually the opposite. And it's kind of interesting. So, but this we can discuss. However, the main point here is that the social movements, as I experienced and observed them, they were trying to use different strategies, and also there were so there was this strategy coming from more organized political activists, but also those persons who became political activists on the feminist side. At that point, they were basically understanding that the historical necessity sort of called them, because the declarations of Polish government that abortion is going to be even more restricted, even more difficult to access, was a very drastic call. So many people and women, but also people who are siding with women, we were astonished by those declarations, and it sounded like a very strong interpellation to take action. But then, if you are not trained as feminist activist or activist as such, you have no idea how to participate in anything, right? So the strategy of producing selfies, putting them on common place in social media, and then building a sense of community and building a sense also of effectivity was important in order to contradict this critique of feminism as always an elitist movement, a movement of educated women from municipal university sectors, etc., etc. So this feminism that I participated in 2016 was one that grew in a very different way than usual. So it was important. Okay, I hope I didn't go too far with this, but
Thank you so much. I just want to add something, which is you propose that you argue that you suggest that that's more appropriate. I think you suggest that feminism has a claim on transforming the basis of politics itself, and this is where counterpublics, the notion of counterpublics, intervenes into your theoretical framework. Let's say, can we more talk about it? I mean, the feminist side of this notion? Because maybe some of us may be familiar with this notion just because of their readings in Frankfurt School, maybe, but you also transform it or innovate it from the very beginning, maybe, by contributing this feminist dimension to the concept. So
I
would you
think
like to
I'm
comment on that as well?
very much so, and thank you for the question, because somehow it's important to see that in the critical theory context, so in Nancy Fraser's articles, the notion of subaltern counterpublics and feminist counterpublics has already existed. So she speaks of contemporary American feminism with all the diversity of genders, of political positions, of ethnicity backgrounds, and social and class backgrounds, as an active counterpublics. So counterpublics in general has those characteristics of being in opposition to the existing public sphere, so the hegemonic public sphere, but also counterpublics undermine the very basic social and cultural norms. So it's a bit more oppositional than the public sphere. So for instance, in liberal society, the public sphere is happy with market economy and is criticizing, I don't know, totalitarian abuses of certain political parties or politicians, while the feminist counterpublic would be demanding the market economy to either change in a huge sense or maybe even to be replaced by some other more egalitarian economy, right? Because this comes from the perspective of reproductive labor and the reproductive labor theory, that the free market ways of organizing this labor or disorganizing this labor to some extent in neoliberal capitalism is abusive for everyone in society except of the 1%, let's say. I'm very much simplifying Nancy Fraser and other people who wrote feminism for 99% here, but I'm trying my best. So somehow feminist counterpublics is important because of understanding how issues of recognition of gender, of cultural production, let's say. This is very, I mean, now I'm trying to reference an article written by Judith Butler in response to Martha Nussbaum. So Martha Nussbaum made this point about Judith Butler's theory being merely cultural, and then Butler responds that what was called by Nussbaum merely cultural is actually having incredibly strong repercussions on people's lives. So phenomena such as violence based on sexual orientation are incredibly tangible and strong and perceptible, and yet they are they are cultural, yes, but they also have this very violent face and very violent dimension. So this is why feminists and feminist queer counterpublics are important, because if we don't embrace that perspective, we neglect such phenomena as violence in domestic life, for instance, which is incredibly expansively present in all societies, in Poland, Turkey, everywhere in the world, as different organizations show us. This violence is a given in most households, actually. So this violence is very much gender-based, and when sexual orientation and sexual identity controversies enter a household or a community, that violence can be even stronger, right? So for instance, in order to not only regulate this violence, but also perhaps erase this violence as such, or discredit it to such extent that it cannot be legitimized and therefore also practiced, we need to have a counterpublics that is feminist and that recognizes domestic violence as a problem, that recognizes reproductive issues, so also abortion, contraceptives, and all this sexual education as problems. So the workers' counterpublics or the bourgeois public sphere, they did not recognize these issues, and it's required feminism to enter into this debate of public sphere counterpublics, etc., to bring the topics of gender identity, of gender-based violence, of orientation and identity-based violence into the debate. On the other hand, what I do with the concept of subaltern counterpublics and feminist subaltern counterpublics is that I try to show that geopolitically we are also different. So I sort of don't believe, Nancy Fraser, that we are all equal in the sense that me, American feminist, and me, Polish feminist, and me, feminist from Turkey, and me, feminist from India, are, and me, feminists from Africa, let's say, Kenya, for instance, that we are equal. Because no, because of all kinds of racialized, stereotyped geopolitical prejudices and inequalities, we are not going to be equal. And depending on the place where we all appear, some inequality will be created just because of geopolitics. So I try in my book to defend the necessity of actually looking at the world as still divided into center peripheries and semi-peripheries. And here, that could be one of the explanations why my book was translated into Turkish as first translation, is that maybe the context of Poland and Turkey don't differ so much in terms of both countries being in different ways, but semi-peripheral. So if we take Immanuel Wallerstein seriously, we can see that Turkey is also somehow lured into the core countries by saying, make some other effort, stop being so religious or, I don't know, traditionalist or whatever, and we will include you. So then Turkey tries to do it, and then suddenly it's like, no, you're not getting into EU in anybody's lifetime. So again, so Poland has the same, with the difference that we were included in the European Union, but still, it's like, okay, so we want to be proper members of EU. No, because you're not democratic enough, you're not egalitarian enough, you're not capitalist enough, or whatever. There is always an extra condition that Poland has to fulfill. So from that perspective of those inequalities, and if we take Kenyan feminists, so if she appears, or if they appear in this kind of international setting, we're going to have a whole plethora of prejudices against racialized populations, against Africa, against Kenya. So the vast ignorance of Kenya as a country. We're going to have people who are going to probably address her still as African feminist rather than Kenyan feminist because of this thinking that, that Africa is, does not have any smaller parts whatsoever. So there is all kinds of, so all those racialized post-colonial stereotypes, they still function in the making of distinctions between us, and they also create violence. So there is the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, to what extent this violence is present. And so the concept of feminist counterpublics, it did and did not account for this diversity. It did in a sense that by calling a counterpublic feminist, we sort of reference. But then if we look deeper into Nancy Fraser's theory, it does not have necessary tools. For me, these tools would be psychoanalytic and coming from psychoanalysis. So I would go into analysis of gender-based violence via the subconscious via the stereotypes that are built in the subconscious of the society, etc. So I would go that way. But there's other ways of making a distinction between counterpublics and feminist counterpublics. Nancy Fraser doesn't seem to make any of these. So this is my problem with Nancy Fraser, and this is why I decided to continue her theorizing, to add some new points. Also in terms of race and ethnicity, but also post-colonial divisions, she doesn't render those divisions in her theory. So again, I'm thinking, fine, this is a nice theory or a nice notion. However, we need some extra elements to it. So for instance, a notion of periphery, semi-periphery, and core to talk about how certain gender inequalities are also intersecting with racialized or economic ones. So that would be a quick version. Do we have more questions or comments or additions?
Quick but very enlightening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So much.
Okay. Ewa, in your conception of counterpublics, labor also occupies a central place. You discuss it very extensively in your book. We know how the private-public or production-reproduction divides have historically served to keep the woman labor's invisible, unwaged, devalued, and enclosed in private space. Feminists have always challenged all these divides. We have put the question of women's labor in terms of social reproduction or the production of the whole life. However, increasing commodification of women's labor, women's care, and effective work in neoliberalism deepens and complicates the invisibility and the devaluation of women's labor. Given the new conditions of exploitation and domination of the women's labor, how can we build feminist counter-publics to challenge against the gender division of labor and to revalue our labor? How can we build the counter-publics of the common on the terrain of labor?
I think that one way is to build a strong, because labor topics ceased to be such important public topics. We are now, I think, in a different position than in the, I don't know, 60s, 70s, 80s, where labor was the center. In Poland, it was the core. As I write about Solidarność, Solidarność was a counter-publics that became an element, a moment of a public sphere. And precisely with the demands of labor, interestingly, also those reiterated by socialist feminists. So one part of Solidarność first early demands from 1980 is about care and affective labor. It's very important. And for me, it was really eye-opening that somehow this making of the opposition between Solidarność in its early days and feminist movement, it should cease to exist. Basically, we should look at these two as a phenomena expressing the historical moment when reproductive labor is recognized. Okay, in Western countries by feminist movements, but in Poland, as we didn't have a feminist movement to speak of, but there were women involved in Solidarność and in the making of the strikes of 1980. And for them, it was central to speak and to demand recognition of house labor, of affective labor, of care labor as labor. So that was really important. And later, Solidarność, of course, erased that part of its heritage. So I'm really sorry to say that they sort of got back into a very conservative mindset. But in 1980, this was a topic, and so the state was made, as it was a socialist country, so it was on the state that all these protesting demanded to take some responsibility for care and reproduction, so that women could not only participate in labor, in productive labor or the labor in the workplace, just to avoid any controversy here, but also to have a life on equal with men. So that was quite a feminist, I would say that was quite a feminist demand. So first of all, we need to reclaim the labor as public topic. Because here the hegemony of liberal thinkers and neoliberal thinkers is incredible. So we tend to talk about democracy, which is deprived of the context of labor and labor inequality. And it's impossible. Democracy is par excellence a political system in which the majority is interpolated to politics. And the majority of every population in our world is a laboring majority, laboring in households, laboring in workplaces, or both. So depriving the democracy of this labor-related content should be criticized all the time. So this is why I think this is how the theory of feminist counterpublics can be useful, because it reclaims labor to become a topic again within discussions of democracy. Because of course, if we talk about fascism, the natural opposition to fascism is democracy. It can be socialist democracy, it can be liberal democracy. Antifascism is basically a bit larger than socialism, which I'm sometimes sorry for, because sometimes liberal voices of antifascism are really irritating, because they don't want to recognize either women as subjects or domestic labor or any other important topics for me. So sometimes I'm really unhappy that I have to somehow side with liberals in this context of antifascism. However, on the other hand, democracy is an important value for me. And this, I continue, I think, the legacy of Rosa Luxemburg, because this was her legacy as well. As much as we remember her as an incredibly radical leftist, she was a Democrat. And it's one of the most important things that I try to preserve in theorizing counterpublics. So I really want liberals to understand better rather than to erase them from political debate. And I'm not trying to, I don't try to be generous here or anything. I'm trying to share this world with people who think differently. However, I think that by this erasure of labor from the democratic debate and from the public debate, liberals are causing wounds on our society, are harming ourselves. This is the extent of my disagreement. It's not only that they are wrong, they are causing real harm to men, women, all kinds of people, and entire households and entire generations, actually. So that's my disagreement with the liberals and neoliberals. But coming to the invisible labor, I think that organizing is the central thing. And I think that neoliberalism and neoliberal economy made organizing impossible. Okay, I don't know the whole society, I know academia and a little bit cultural sector, but in my sectors, in the sectors of labor where I move around, organizing is incredibly difficult. Academia is shaped today in such a way that academics cannot discuss. This is how academia is shaped. We are expected to deliver and go home, or go to some other workplace, basically, because we are also expected to work in 5 workplaces or 7 workplaces at once, right? Those of us who have work. Because also there is the other neoliberal option for academic, which is being kicked out of any academic place whatsoever. And this is something that we have witnessed in Turkey a lot. And we have witnessed this also in Poland to some extent. Some people cannot find work in academia precisely because they have been demanding too much of the public debate, of the academia as workplace, etc. So from this perspective, and then if we add to this very sad image, I would say, because academia used to be a site of debate. Now it's not. So let's look at other workplaces, how deprived of debate and democracy they have become, even more. But also workplaces, they are separated. This is the issue discussed by Italian feminists since 1970s. So I won't say anything new, unfortunately, here. But just to reiterate the word, it's the separation in the household, individual household, that make it impossible or very difficult for a woman or a person who is a caregiver to step up. Because first of all, Silvia Federici was writing so many times about how difficult it is to strike against your child or your husband or your partner or whoever you have at home. It's almost impossible. But also there is a lack of connection and a lack of debate. I think it's very crucial because we need to confront our visions of how the world should be with others. This is a very important psychological need, that if we are isolated in our struggle, or if we stop debating, so if we are many, but without any discussion, we lose the point, basically. So there is this incredible need of having a diversity of entities, of claims, of subjectivities, to work together, precisely to proliferate our demands. Because also as a group, if we started, for instance, now to build some list of demands for better, better democracy or better labor or better world, we would probably make it better than each of us on our own, precisely because we would have the opportunity to proliferate our discussion. So when we look at invisible labor and household labor, first of all, the recognition that it is a labor. So the vocalizing, and this is what happened in Poland in 2016, where abortion ceased to be a topic of choice and started to be a topic of reproduction and reproductive justice. So then all other issues of reproduction could join in. And it was not only about abortion, it was also about sexual education, so sexual health, reproductive justice, so all the packets of women versus healthcare combination, but then also the reproductive labor, the care labor, the affective labor, and all this packet. So somehow any chance of building collectivity is the first and foremost necessity. And so the notion of counterpublics is helpful because it gives a version of community in which those individuals can work together. How they get together, that's the most difficult topic, perhaps. I mean, in Poland, we had Kaczyński. So to him, we should thank for uniting Polish women and our allies, basically. I'm sorry to say, but this is history is very ironic this way, that it positions this kind of ugly creatures as our former vice prime minister to unite all, basically everybody was united in 2016 and 17 against this fascist definition of woman as basically as incubator, because this is what we became reduced to. And it was very dangerous for the lives of women, but also there was a huge depreciation of our subjectivity and our political value as such, and our labor, of course. So within neoliberalism, I think that the return of the issues of labor and of all of it, so what was called the productive labor, but also what was called reproductive and affective labor, this set of topics has to be made political over and over again. This is an absolutely necessary condition for any counterpublics to be counterpublics precisely, because otherwise we are sucked into the liberal discourse. So if we only speak about women's rights, but we don't specify that they are work-related, it's so easy to get hijacked by the narrative of neoliberal feminism and to be this token for diversity in liberal discourse. So this I want to avoid. And therefore, it has to be a bit more radical. So for me, for instance, in Poland, one of the most irritating way of being this kind of feminist that is difficult to absorb is a constant referencing of Rosa Luxemburg, who is, by the way, largely unknown, as both during communist and during liberal times, we did not really have collective works of Rosa Luxemburg published. So the communist state of Poland was very unhappy with Luxemburg. They gave her name to factories, to streets, to squares, but they almost never published her books. Then neoliberal capitalism comes and we have the same. So we have only now 3 or 4 books becoming a set of collective works of Luxemburg, and we are very slowly learning the importance of this work and the actuality of this work. So the actuality of the critics of imperialism, the actuality of the critique of censorship, the actuality of demands for solidarity rather than support, and of learning from the struggle and not from above the struggle. So all these elements that are so necessary, they sit there. And I think that, yeah, I would stop because I think maybe we are reaching the time. I don't feel I answered the question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ewa.
Gökhan, is there anything you want to add or comment on? Gökhan, are you with me? But your voice is close.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm very glad to listen and think collectively now all together, and to meet at least from the Zoom face to face with Ewa. Well, actually, too many questions, but we don't have time. So many things that was in my mind you already talked about, and I'm very happy to hear. Maybe the latest urgent things that we are facing nowadays in terms of anti-fascism, you know, now we are witnessing a genocide in Palestine, and it is, of course, a feminist anti-fascist issue, and it's part of our lives. Today is the 161st day of the genocide, Palestine genocide. So I don't know. I have a very I'm a poet, and I have very deep and complex and chaotic feelings and a lot of ideas. So I don't know if I can put in terms very correct, but I will just very friendly try. So just let's imagine as a feminist counter-public space as an anti-fascist, feminist anti-fascist sphere, what would be the form of solidarity, of international solidarity with Palestinian resistance, with Palestinian queers, Palestinian feminists, Palestinian women, firstly, but at the end with all the Palestinian people in terms of anti-fascist, feminist counter space, what we can imagine, what kind of counter space we can build up internationally. Thinking of all your notions you are discussing in the book, I would like to hear a bit about that. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing us to this incredibly painful conflict and basically genocidal conflict that is happening now in Palestine, and where Israel somehow repeats the very violence it suffered in the territory from which I'm talking to you. So in the territory of Poland, what was happening was an effort to erase the Jewish population. And I believe that Israel is not very far, unfortunately, and very sadly, from repeating, so psychoanalytically speaking, from repeating that kind of violence. It is thinking in terms of eliminating an entire ethnic group. It is incredibly harsh. So basically, I think that the feminist counterpublics, or anybody for that matter, any person, any group, anyone, should absolutely resist that version of solving any political controversy. Because of course there is a huge political controversy at the core of this dramatic situation. And there are disagreements that might be, I mean, looking at the situation of Israel-Palestine from Poland is a very specific occasion, and it influences your thinking, because we know that a large part of the people who created Israel as a state came from here, and they were not. Some of them maybe have chosen to go to Palestine, but most of them did not choose it. They were basically evacuating from a continent which was occupied by genocidal fascists at the point, right? So to criticize Israel from such a position, from such a location, is incredibly difficult, because I understand that a large part of the population of this country came running away from it. However, as Frantz Fanon, as Achille Mbembe, as so many other authors, as Judith Butler for that matter, so all kinds of people coming from all parts of the world, and historically quite different as well, they all speak of Israeli politics as being colonial one, as being a very, unfortunately, very good example of colonial entity. So I can't disagree with that, honestly. I can't disagree with it. I would love to disagree with it, and I was making many efforts actually to try to disagree with that point, but I can't. Because unfortunately, several very basic elements, so extractivism, so all this occupation pattern, and it is called occupation. Even Israeli right-wing people are talking about occupation. Occupation is not a way of building politics based on solidarity, democracy, or whatever. Between occupation and democracy, there is a sharp opposition. They are not conciliable in any way. So I think that feminist counterpublics could be a way of thinking about Palestine and Israel in all the diversity of positions, because I believe the way I started to talk about that situation is quite different from the ones that you hear in Turkey, and probably would be quite different from the debates in Brazil, America, and all kinds of other places. So I think that feminist counterpublics, and I have actually seen it happening in several locations, but one very prominent was this Marxist feminist conference in Warsaw in November last year. So already when this dramatic, I can't say conflict even, because it's not enough. Yes? So this dramatic situation in Palestine was starting. We had guests from all over the world, all continents, representing all versions of being leftist. And so it was a very complicated moment and a very complicated place, because for some people, the notion of genocide is absolutely a necessity. For some people, it is very difficult to pronounce, and yet they would still criticize Israel. Some of feminist participants of that conference wanted to focus on terrorism and various versions of terrorism that sort of fuel the on all sides fuel the situation. Some were focusing on something else, and basically it's incredibly easy in this kind of, and also we are neighboring with Germany, and in Germany it seems to me that even saying the word Palestine is already forbidden. I'm not sure, I haven't been in Germany in the last months, but I'm going there in April, and I'm going to check whether I can legitimately say the name Palestine, because I think it might already be taken as anti-Semite by some people in participating in this discussion. So somehow neighboring with Germany makes me and many of my colleagues here in Poland very worried about how the erasure of any thinking in different categories is progressing in Germany again, and how certain people coming from Germany are feeling like as if they had a moral superiority of some kind to teach everybody else what is anti-Semitism. And with this I disagree very strongly, because while I'm very much against anti-Semitism as well, I don't want to label people anti-Semite just because they say something that I don't even know whether I agree or not, but that sounds different from what I'm thinking, okay? So very often this label of anti-Semitism is, I think, pinned on people in current Germany just because somebody hears sentences that sound different from how I have the this conflict described in my head. So I think that this kind of immediate labeling and immediate exclusion should absolutely not be present in any country, in Germany, in Poland, anywhere. And I think it's incredibly dangerous because it fuels various versions of ultra-radicalist thinking, and it also fuels the fundamentalist sides of both sides, the fundamentalists on both sides of that conflict. So it gives a ready-made argument of, these or those people are absolutely intolerant, therefore we have to stand with force to defend, etc., etc. So I think that feminist counterpublics should be, and feminism has been, and Bell Hooks has very beautiful lines about it in feminist theory, where she says that feminism is maybe the social movement and theory context, which was the most self-critical and autocritical. And I think feminism has a history of democracy and debate, which is maybe bigger than Marxist history or other social currents history. And I think we should use it. So basically, this plethora of possible positions, but also possible perspectives. Also, one last thing. In times biopolitically governed by social media, we are very much used to have the opinion. So the two buttons we have at our disposal is I accept or I deny. In the conflicts of Palestine in Israel, I don't know now what I think, because I think for 2 days I have not been reading about it. You see, so I don't have enough knowledge to say exactly what I think today. Okay, I think the situation hasn't changed so much, but still, I would need, before I take a position, I would like to have a space to inform myself, okay? And this kind of information-seeking position is completely excluded, but also the position of, okay, I have my opinion, but I want to hear the other person's opinion. And maybe then agree or disagree. I don't want to label another person as anti-Semite or, I don't know, Arabophobic, although this is much less used, interestingly. But I don't want to label people immediately just because I hear something that sounds different from what I have in my head. This is and I think feminism is a global movement enough to understand that and this is what we were talking about in Warsaw, that we came from very different countries in which the same situation in Israel and Palestine, but also Ukraine and Russia, was described in so very different ways. So for some people, Ukraine was non-existent until very recently. For some people, Palestine was not an evident place because of the location, because of how our lessons of geography were proceeding. So also having the patience of hearing the other person until they end their speech in this conflictual situations, especially, is a value. It sounds very simplistic, right? Letting somebody finish their statement. However, this is not happening much in most of the discussions about the genocide in Palestine, and I think it should happen. And I believe that feminist counterpublics precisely could allow this to happen. So I believe that within the feminist context, we can make space for discussion, but also for solidarity. And I think, but this freedom of discussion is the very first condition for any solidarity to happen, because otherwise, you don't build solidarity. You are labeled as extremist or something, that you're not building any solidarity whatsoever. So making this common space for debate, and then building solidarity networks of basically all versions of them are necessary right now, I think. So that would be a little bit of an answer.
Thank you. Yes, it's really a feminist issue. On the other side, I feel like just agreeing on you is like binary white and black, queer as a tool gives to, deepen, to think about, and answers are not really very easy, and I think also feminism plus queer will be very in need of listening and rereading what's going on over there, because also all these notions and all those discussions and all those narratives are being used in terms of neoliberal ideas, like picturing Israel as the new heaven of freedom of queers, for the rich queer people, of course, and it has no notion of class at all, or Palestinian queers even they do not have any right for anything for those heaven,
Okay.
where there is also hell is created. Anyway, so pinkwashing and all the feminist notions and everything, every word, before labeling us, we need to, you know, repeat it again and again. We need to listen each other. And first, the freedom we should reclaim as feminists and queers, reclaim our words and our understanding and our narratives, then the solidarity, and then the other parts. I agree with you. Thank you so much, Ewa.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your time with us. It has been longer than we expected, but thank you very much for your patience and contribution, and all for all these beautiful and encouraging words. I think we are going to meet again as much
I
as
hope so. I very much hope
our
so.
struggle against fascism goes on.
I'm gonna
hope-
definitely try to put you together with some other Polish feminists and maybe other feminists from our region in the discussions. I'll be very happy to sort of return in favor and also gather all of us with maybe some other international feminists for another debate if
Yeah, that
you'll
would be
agree
more
to.
than beautiful.
Let's
Thank you so
continue.
much. Okay, let's continue.
Thank you so very much.
Let's keep
And
in
have a good
touch.
day and
Let's
good
keep
luck
in
with all
touch.
the